All right. Hello. Good afternoon, everybody. Looks like we've got some people logging in. We will just give them a minute to get on here, and then we will introduce everybody. Hope everyone's enjoying their afternoon. Right. Let's see. All right, we got enough people in here to get started. All right, so we'll let people trickle in. Um, just wanted to thank everybody for taking the time out of their busy afternoons to join us for this amazing event. For those of you who don't know, I try to host webinars every month or at least every other month at a minimum, usually tailored towards public adjusters, but they range on in topics and what is going on in the first party property damage world. This is an event I've been wanting to put together for a few months now, and I'm really excited about the people that are attending here with me. We have this roundtable of industry professionals that range in the insurance industry on what they do. What I'll do is I'll go ahead and let everybody introduce themselves, starting with Veronica.
Hi, Matthew. Thank you. Thank you for hosting this roundtable, this webinar. Well, my name is Veronica. I'm the owner of Prime Public Adjusters. I've been doing this for almost 8 years now, and I think it's great.
Perfect. Ben?
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ben Suskind. I'm the founder owner of All Dry USA, ADU Contractors, and we're approaching year 14 and happy to service the state of Florida.
Jonathan?
Thank you, Matt. Hi, everyone. My name is Jonathan Dickler. I am a licensed mold assessor. I'm the owner of Mold Testing Live, and I am grateful to be here, excited to provide some input.
All right, and I am Matt Gelber, the founder of Gelber Law Group. I am an attorney who's been practicing for 10 years now, 7 of which has been in the property industry, property damage, doing first-party claims on behalf of homeowners. And what I think we're going to do, we have some topics that we want to go through today that we think are of great interest in the industry. But as I mentioned, this is a round table. So there's a Q&A box. And for the attendees, can you just drop something in the box? Can you see, is the chat enabled, allowing you to send messages? Let me know. It looks like anyone can send messages, but I just want to make sure. So the chat should be enabled, and okay, cool. It looks like the Q&A is enabled. So basically, we have some topics that are prepared here, but the purpose of this roundtable is to get some interest in everybody attending. If there's a topic or a question that you want to ask one of the panelists or just generally us collectively, feel free to drop it in the chat, and one of the 4 of us will get to it when we can. And if what we're talking about triggers another question or anything like that, feel free to chime in, and we want to make this as fruitful as possible. So without further ado, the first topic that we wanted to talk about today is talking about the biggest challenge that we've seen in how insurance companies are handling claims since the latest Florida legislation passed. So who wants to kick this off?
Well, I definitely think that the elimination of the attorney's fees has definitely has brought a challenge into the industry because we now have homeowners that have to face more legal costs when it comes to disputing the claims. So I think that has put a lot of pressure onto the homeowners, and they are now having to come out with higher out-of-pocket expenses.
Yeah, and to piggyback off that, what we're seeing on the litigation side, pretty much because they know that they don't have to pay attorney's fees anymore. At first people were optimistic. Oh, well, that means that they'll just put more money towards indemnity on valid claims because that's now reserves they don't have to pay towards attorney's fees. But What we're actually seeing is, well, now that you don't have to pay attorney's fees, we know if we drag this out and you hire a lawyer, that's just more percentage of the claim that you're giving up. And some lawyers, not us at Gelber Law Group, but some law firms don't want to do the nitty gritty in the trenches where they're highly litigious and we have to respond and file our counter motions. So, the firms that are known on the defense side as heavy litigators, you're in for a battle. But any plaintiff's attorney who's not filing proposals for settlements in these days is really doing their clients a disservice, because we are seeing, once you do that, the leverage starts to shift. And although they may not accept that proposal, it does get them to the table quicker, and they probably put more money on the table than they were planning on. So that's kind of what we're seeing on the litigation side. Ben and Jonathan, have you guys seen any difference in your industries?
I can take that. I believe that when we're presenting claim documentation, either we get no communication back, or we're being directed to representation, which means if they don't have a PA or if they don't have an attorney in line, our docs are kind of set aside. It'll be reviewed when the claim is finished or when they finish their estimates. We also see a lot of things being reassigned when we ask for more questions. So I believe that we need to find out from counsel and from public adjusters, how best to present the claims with them. How can we work together to present these claims?
Yeah, and from my side as a mold assessor or, a mold inspector, I've had to move away a lot from insurance because I've seen so many of the instant denials, and especially with mold coverage in general, a lot of people are not using their mold coverage. They're not looking for mold on their water damage claims. But there's also usually small caps for the mold. So I think people have to be aware of that. Um, but definitely, I think the denials, slow everyone down, and when there's mold involved, it becomes very medically sensitive. So that's my angle on it.
All right. Let's see. We're answering the questions as they're coming in. Yes, a copy of this this webinar will be emailed to everybody to the email address you use to register. I think it's within a few hours, but probably within 24 hours. I think it sends it automatically. All right, so the next topic that we wanted to talk about to all the panelists: how are you adjusting your contracts, documentation, or intake processes to stay compliant with new legal timelines and coverage limits?
Well, on my side, I can tell you that every public adjuster should definitely join a professional association like FAPIA, NAPIA. They are the ones that often flag any changes into the law, and they will provide regular updates to everybody. I think that's definitely a great tool that public adjusters should utilize to stay updated and make sure that your contracts, your documentations are in compliance. I also want to say that when it comes to coverages limits, make sure that everybody is reviewing the complete policy. Like that should be step number one. Review the entire policy, make sure that you're checking for endorsements, limitations, anything that the client should be aware of from the beginning.
Absolutely. I mean, it used to be that you could get away with just reviewing the deck page and having a pretty good idea of what applies. But I mean, aside from the 1% matching endorsements, the citizens policies with DOA, which is the bane of my existence, just to name a few, it's not only that, but as I mentioned already, with no attorney's fees, we've had to change our contracts, and it's a different conversation when we're speaking with the homeowner, where they're basically saying, well, after I pay the public adjuster and I pay you, so that means at best I'm only left with a certain percentage. And what we tell them, unfortunately, is that that's the landscape that we're in. There are potential bills that are hopefully going to be passed, if not this session, then in an upcoming session that kind of swings the pendulum back. But that's another reason why those proposals for settlement are so huge. But reviewing the entire policy is vital. I mean, you not only are you doing a disservice to the client, but you could potentially be committing malpractice. So like Veronica said, you have these professional organizations, like FAPIA is amazing. They're such a resource for public adjusters. And if you're not involved in that kind of organization, you should definitely join some kind of group of like-minded people, similar public adjusters, or a group that has first-party professionals, not just limited to attorneys or public adjusters, that you could bounce ideas off of. Ben, Jonathan, how about you guys? How you're adjusting your contracts in any way these days? You kind of mentioned briefly.
And we try to respect the budgets that are available. So I believe that in construction, we're working with the budgets that are set by the PA, by the IA, by the settlement, right? But making valid estimates in the first place, ensuring that we can provide clearer estimates that give you those, if everyone's familiar, those F9 notes for your exactament estimates, right? If we can give you a little more detail about code, or back it up with the engineering, or back it up with the permit process, right? I think it makes it a little easier for, again, presenting the claim, but we don't operate in the claim space. We operate based on whatever budget's provided for us. But that's how we've changed and it was years ago, but that's how we've changed our contracts in a major way, where we're working off proceeds, but oftentimes we're not even working off insurance claim proceeds. We're working off whatever budget the homeowner will assign us. So we're kind of outside that realm, so that the professionals, or right, the attorney can disperse properly from his trust account, right? And at that point, we can step in as contractors. But like you said, it's about understanding all the coverages. We're seeing, I would like to say, opportunities, right, for us, when a PA or an attorney can identify for us, hey guys, there's absolutely loss of use here, or business interruption here. If you need the homeowner to move out, advising us of what the coverages are, because as you all know, we rely on you to advise us and the customer on coverages. That's not something we can advise on. So there's amazing amounts of loss of use coverage and contents coverage that we really could be beneficial to the client, to the customer, if we're advised it's available, right? And I also believe that a lot of those coverages, correct me if I'm wrong, are based on, or a lot easier to present if their service is rendered. So if we're advised that it's available, we will go advance, dry cleaning or those type of, textile treatment or et cetera, contents work, and then let you go present the claim and make sure that it's paid out at the end.
Yeah, and on our end, as doing inspections and assessments, we definitely emphasize documentation. I think it's especially important when you're talking about mold specifically, just so that, and you talk about how quickly everything has to be done, but even more so with mold. So I think it's important to get assessments done quickly after a loss. And especially with mold assessors, there's problems when they create protocols that are too broad, or they say, gut the whole house when it's just one room that's affected. So I think it's very important to have the science part of it really understood with the moisture, and that might hopefully light the fire, I think, under the feet of the insurance company, because now we have moisture damage, microbial growth, contamination. So I just emphasize documentation as much as you can, pictures throughout the whole process.
Jonathan, do you recommend, I'm sorry to ask, do you recommend mold testing after every water loss?
Yeah, great question. And I was going to bring that up today. There absolutely should be. One reason is because if you have mold coverage, why would you not want to use it? If you're paying for it. But it's really more from the health perspective, I mean, almost every water loss, there will be some kind of mold or bacteria, or, it could be something relatively small, but you don't want it to get bigger. That's what happens. Um, but the way I see it, yeah, if there's water damage, why would you not at least check? And you have to be careful because if you just rip out these walls as if there was no mold, then you could be stirring up a huge disaster. So with mold, we want everything contained. And I think for everyone's safety, there absolutely should be a mold assessment.
Yeah, and it looks like Chrissy dropped a question in the chat. I think Ben, I think this might apply to you more than the rest of us, but so I'll give you first dibs. Her question says, how much impact do you think restorers approaching clients as the one that will be paid by the insurance company, as opposed to the client being reimbursed by the insurance company, has an effect on the claims handling process? You want to give that a shot?
I mean, I can speak on experience, right? Not per se coverage or insurance policy,
Sure.
right? I know from our history, if a client, whips out their checkbook and writes a check for services, there is higher chance of them getting paid out, right? Oftentimes, and I don't know how it works legally, but if a customer writes, a $60,000 check to replace their roof after damages and everything is documented, I've seen reimbursement paid better for that. But if you're talking about restorative services, our proposals that we write are paid by the carrier majority of the times when we present a homeowner with the bill. And I'll say from the restoration side, it's why we haven't used an assignment in 7 years, right? Basically half the time of this company. And there's multiple reasons for that. On the other hand, it's about what services you want to provide. I think we discussed this at a prior call regarding, the insurance company has to be able to investigate. The PA needs to be able to investigate and document so they have a fair approach to the claim, right? And then we keep talking about documentation. So that winning circle of documentation, I know many restoration companies do an awesome job at documentation. I know we've been awarded for it. And the part of the documentation is the mold tester being able to write a clear protocol, right? Areas being contained immediately if they're highly affected, right? So that we know, you tell the insurance company the whole house is affected, it becomes an issue, right? But if we can identify a certain area and say, okay, well, these other areas, and I'll give an easy tip on how we address it. I don't really believe there's unaffected area in a home once there's mold spores, right? I do believe that instead of unaffected, that I see IAs, right? And I don't know if there's any IAs on this call, but if anybody has written IA estimates, insurance estimates, they write unaffected area on a lot of rooms they measure. But truly, if it's between the front door and the area of work, we label them all access pathways. We do wipe down outside the containment. There's no other way to properly address it. So to directly answer the question, do I believe restorative services are reimbursed better if they're done up front? Absolutely. It is a big expense and cost burden on restoration companies, though. We're advancing millions of dollars in work with the trust that we're working with competent PAs that have analyzed the policy. And that's why I think the trifecta of having a licensed mold assessor, a licensed public adjuster, a BARD attorney that specializes in the space, working together for the homeowner and for the customer, right? If we all put that customer's end result in the front of our minds, I think it's a win, right? Every project we should approach as, how do I walk away making this better, right? For our client, for our customers.
Yeah. And Ben, you brought up a lot of great information that I want to expand on. I'm trying to figure out where to start. Well, I guess to answer, I think her name was Chrissy. To answer Chrissy's question a little differently, what we're finding, at least on the litigation side, for these vendors, these EMS companies that the homeowner may find, however, newspaper, online, but they're not really industry professionals. They may just be a restoration company. I see these nationwide vendors where we tell them, hey, this claim's in litigation, the insurance company hasn't paid it yet. And they're like, oh, that's too bad. Our contract says net 30, and they send them to a collections attorney. And they're not reasonable with their bills. I mean, and that's why it's important that we, I'm not saying we're hosting this event to refer business to everybody here, but when you have these contractors, these restoration companies, these mold assessors, these public adjusters that you do business with, that you trust, and you would put your family members' claims in their hands, which we do, it makes things so much easier. For example, there's a restoration company where we work with them. They never send the bill to the homeowner. They're always like, just keep us in the loop with the litigation. And there are times where they go out and they do a TARP and they give us the bill and they tell us, look, this is the lowest we're willing to take. And sometimes we can't even get them that much. And we say, hey, look, are you willing to work with us here? And they do. And that's not to say, look to the restoration guy to always be the first person to take the haircut, because we're all doing it together. But Ben, you brought up on the call we did earlier this week that we're all in this industry to help the insured. And as long as we all handle the claims, in our lanes, but with that purpose in mind, I think that more often than not, we get the result that the insured is looking for. And that's really important. So in addition to that, you mentioned a couple of times about incurred costs, and I actually hosted an entire webinar about this because this is a really hot topic in litigation in our industry. And any of the public adjusters I work with, they know that the conversations we have with the insureds before we file the lawsuit now is completely different than it was even 12 months ago. And it's because these judges are making these ridiculous rulings that they're misinterpreting the law, or they're misapplying one fact to a very specific case. For example, there's an appellate case that Universal had with where the insured, sold their house before doing repairs, and the court there determined, well, you don't get RCV because even if we paid you RCV, you couldn't take that depreciation and repair it because you don't own it anymore. And so now these defense attorneys are taking that ruling and saying, you filed the lawsuit without doing repairs, you can never get RCV. And if I could tell you how many times the judges are buying that argument, or they're granting motions in limine, which prevent us from showing the jury evidence at trial of the actual repair cost, even though you only get the ACV calculation by taking the depreciated amount and subtracting, you take the whole RCV value and you subtract depreciation. That's how you calculate ACV. So you don't just come up with an ACV number, and these judges just don't understand it. So incurring the expenses is a huge benefit, but unfortunately many homeowners can't afford that. So we're kind of in this like catch-22 right now in the litigation world. Many times we're able to get around it, but we're always having that conversation with the homeowner and the public adjuster, like, hey, you've been paid enough to at least do some kind of repair to your roof. Even if it doesn't get it done, I would recommend you do something so we can show that to the judge and to the jury, so you don't waive those arguments. So that's just one thing that we're seeing these days. Veronica and Jonathan, did you want to add anything else to that, or should we go to the next topic?
No, I think you've covered everything. You and Ben have covered everything.
Perfect. All right. And remember, and actually everybody, before we end the webinar, I think that the panelists should drop their contact info in the chat. Everybody here is experienced in the industry and has a wealth of knowledge. Jonathan, his social media page, he's known as Mold Assessor, and he puts out such amazing content, not just from a claims aspect, but from like a health aspect, whether for your clients or even for yourself. If you're health conscious, he talks about the health risks that are involved in mold, not just from a property damage standpoint. So if not for nothing, he's got great content. You know, we all put out good content, so we'll put our information in the chat before we end. All right, so the next topic we wanted to get to is, what are some common mistakes that you're seeing homeowners make that put their claims at risk, especially after recent storms?
I would like to say that one of the most common mistakes that we're seeing is the delay in reporting the claims. Homeowners are often waiting weeks, months before they initially report the claim to the carriers. And unfortunately, this is leading the carriers to deny the claims for late reporting. Also, a lot of times, not knowing or not having enough information could also hurt the claim. And there are homeowners that do repairs without taking proper evidence, photos, videos, documenting what the damage was about. And then those are the most common mistakes that, we come across.
Yeah.
Well, for one thing, speaking of mold, and thank you for the shout out. I see a lot of people with mold, but they have a trouble identifying an insurance claim. So I think, that's where I tend to come in handy is, sometimes I'll look through a home and I'll find 2 or 3 claims that we didn't even know about or additional damage. But we definitely caution people not to just call the insurance and definitely without representation and just say, oh, there's mold here. A lot of times that can defeat your chances at having a claim. So I think really important to get the right inspection so you could say, okay, this was a roof leak claim or a bathtub leak claim or whatever kind of moisture damage. Instead of just calling and saying you have mold, you could have a completely covered claim. And I think a lot of people shouldn't speak with the insurance at all without the right representation, someone to support your arguments.
Yeah, I mean, and to reiterate what I just said about doing repairs, the number one thing that can destroy a claim is when a homeowner starts ripping up the damage and discarding the evidence before they call the claim in. So, I know that the industry professionals know the balance of mitigating damage and promptly reporting, and it's kind of like no matter what happens, you're either you're failing to mitigate properly if you take too long and you show them the damage, or you're prejudicing their investigation because you ripped everything up before they get a chance to see it. So it's obviously always best for a homeowner who thinks they have a claim to talk to a professional before they talk to the insurance company. But unfortunately, sometimes that's not the cards that were dealt. Sometimes the homeowner calls us after that stuff has been done. And so that's where you, as the claims professional, can kind of step in and do whatever you can to document everything, because even though they may claim prejudice and it may be something we have to overcome, it is something that can be overcome. And many times, if we show them, okay, after this happened, we had a leak detection done, we pulled like the water bills, we did all these various things. We provided evidence. We got photos from the contractor who did the work. It's really hard for them to stand by that prejudice argument, or at least it's enough for there to be, the argument that even though they ripped things up, there's still a way that you can get the claim covered. But I would say that, and also just late reporting in general. I mean, for anybody who's been in the industry longer than 2021, we went from reporting the claim 3 years after a loss to 2 years, and now it's 1 year. And that doesn't mean if you report the claim, 10 or 11 months out, that they're not going to say that they were prejudiced. It just means that they have a shorter amount of time where they can raise that defense. Because now, if the most you can do is 12 months, arguably after one or 2 months, they're going to say they were prejudiced. And some insurance companies like Universal, they raise that defense if they reported 3 or 4 days late, like literally, and they'll take that defense all the way to trial. But for reasons I still don't understand, they wait for the jury to hear all of that, And then after we're done with our case, they tell the judge they're withdrawing that defense after the jury's already hated them for it. But that's not to say they'll do that on every case, but I would say late reporting and, ripping up stuff before they call the claim in and before they can let the insurance company inspect are the number 1 and 2 reasons why, common mistakes the homeowners are making.
So Matt, going back to your question, I really think the answer comes from your side and obviously the public adjusters. Is it more beneficial for us to write a detailed estimate, scope of the property document, and present it to you, or should we go ahead and do the work? I'd say 90% of the time we're told to go ahead and do what's necessary, right? 10% of the time we have files where the PA or even someone's insurance agent is advising them to, go into this holding pattern. So do we document it and submit you an estimate? Or, Jonathan's going to say, mold is literally a growing concern.
Yeah, so there's no black and white answer. And I feel like that's most of the things with law, and especially most of the things with these insurance policies. Because you have this overarching duty to mitigate, and they don't define what that entails. You just have to mitigate damages. And most policies even say this may include a permanent repair if necessary to protect the property from further damage. Again, not defined any further, and the courts are kind of all over the place on how that's interpreted in practice. But what I would say is, unless it's like after a hurricane where there's like catastrophic flooding everywhere, I would still at least try to call the claim in before you're doing anything, or at a minimum, if you are doing something, document it with photos, with videos. There's nothing better than a video showing the water gushing out of the, the P-trap or the hot water supply line, because even if they try to say, oh, that's an ongoing long-term thing. I mean, you got the water gushing out. How could they say that? I don't think anybody would question you having to do something to stop that, because otherwise the claim would be denied for neglect and failing to mitigate. I think there's a balance at what point you stop the repairs, at least until they can inspect, where the mitigation stops and the kind of demo continues. And I think you would be best suited to kind of know where that is. But documentation is key in pretty much every aspect of the claims, because, that video or those photos that show the condition when you got there and before you started the work versus what it looked like when you were done, how would they be able to say you weren't following the obligation to mitigate damages under the policy?
Right, yeah, I definitely agree with Matthew. If the homeowner it's mitigating, absolutely. Like if they had flood or they had a major leak in the property and they have to start the dry out process to mitigate and avoid further damages, agree. But documentation is key, is definitely key. And if you are removing some areas and you can preserve the evidence, then at least wait for the initial inspection to be performed. Like for instance, if the mitigation companies are removing cabinets, if you can preserve those cabinets until the inspection, that's definitely key. That's definitely, or if they're replacing the plumbing system from the house, carriers and inspectors and field adjusters, they are asking to take the opportunity to inspect those items. So yeah, I agree with Matthew.
And not only that, but the most important thing is, like, if it's a damaged P-trap or if it's some kind of plumbing component, the homeowner needs to make sure it's kept on site for inspection, because even the most legitimate, like, slam dunk claim that's clear, a one-time accidental leak, when the pipe's already been replaced by the time the field adjuster gets there and they ask for the line and we say, oh, we threw it out. I'd say 9 times out of 10, that claim is denied. They raise prejudice, and even the engineers, and even on our side, our engineers who are trying to find coverage for the homeowner, they're like, well, I can make the argument that it was more than likely this because it's recent. I'm not seeing a bunch of mold. The particle board looks separated but not long term. But I can't say for sure because I didn't see the pipe or the piece. So that's again, it's that balance of remediating, but also keeping the evidence to support the claim. It looks like Travis asked, any noise on attorney's fees coming back? So there's a House bill and a Senate bill that are making progress. The House bill has way more traction than the Senate bill, at least the last time I checked. That's being pushed, and it was actually drafted by Hillary Cassell, who's a plaintiff's, well, she was a plaintiff's attorney, kind of can't practice now because she's in legislation, but she's also a FAPIA member. Her version is loser pays, which potentially means if the insurance company were to beat their demand amount, their response to the notice of intent amount, the homeowner would pay. The Senate bill, I believe, tries to bring it back the way that it was. Shout out to Nancy, the eyes and ears of FAPIA. She's in here and she said that's correct. It's all about the Senate now. I know, I know that they met yesterday. I didn't get a chance to see what was going on there, but from what I heard, it seems like the Senate version isn't picking up enough traction. So that's why I was saying earlier, I don't know that it will pass this time, but the important thing, and we can talk about it now if you guys like, but the important thing is that there's at least enough of a wave with this whole report that was buried by OIR. And for those of you who aren't familiar, I can give a Cliff Notes version. The legislature, who either were buying the lies in 2022 or were just, taking funds and pushing agendas. And I'm not making any accusations, but regardless of what their motives were, they passed this legislation that stripped attorneys' fees and basically took away any kind of consumer rights for homeowners. And that's kind of why these insurance companies are emboldened. But now there was this report done by a forensic accountant out of Arizona, and right before they passed the legislation in 2022 that took away all these rights, they actually said in there, the reason why the insurance crisis in Florida is happening is because there's these MGAs, which are basically third-party affiliates of these insurance companies that are funneling hundreds of millions of dollars. In fact, I think it was even billions with a B. And they were claiming, like the insurance company was claiming they were taking losses in the millions, but funneling billions with a B to their offshore affiliates. And I don't really fully understand how it works, but I guess these affiliates aren't held to the same requirements that insurance companies are about how much profit they can take in each year. And so, the old commissioner who conveniently resigned 2 weeks before legislation was passed that barred former insurance executives from taking legislative roles like lobbyist roles, which is where he is now. He claimed he didn't act on it because it was draft form. Well, that forensic accountant testified at legislation with the House and said, no, it was not in draft form. Not only was it not in draft form, but we told him it wasn't. I reached out multiple times to the Office of Insurance Regulation, never heard a peep. And then when he resigned, David Altmaier, Jaworski took over, and apparently they never spoke about this report, and he claims he never knew about it. It's all just a load of baloney, but apparently all of the legislatures are like, they understand what's going on now. They have to go back to their constituents and talk about why their rates are still going up. Some of these defense attorneys on LinkedIn, I try not to engage in it too much, but they're posting reform in action, how the premium was this much and now it's gone down this much, and it's just craziness. But to answer your question, I do believe they'll come back. I don't think they'll come back this session, but I will gladly eat my words and be wrong about that. So, all right, next topic. For those in the field, have you noticed any specific insurance companies harder to work with or easier? And what trends are you seeing across different insurance companies?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. There are some carriers that are becoming a total nightmare to work with. Some of them are totally no responsive, like they won't get back to you, they won't answer. There are some carriers that are asking to speak only with the clients, even though there is a letter of representation. So yes, definitely we've seen it. We see it all the time.
Yeah. Ben and Jonathan, I think you guys don't, you guys mostly do, you don't do like directions to pay mostly, right? Directly with the homeowner?
We submit documentation to carriers, but it's with the homeowner or with the representative.
Yeah. So, okay, so Nancy asked if we could poll the audience. Let me see if I know how to do that. Or maybe I just ask everybody. Okay, so for those public adjusters in the chat, could you just do us a favor? How many of you are having your contracts rejected by the carriers in one way or another? And I'd like for everybody to answer. So if you could just put like a Y for yes or an N for no, that way we can just take a quick poll. Looks like we have two so far, Captain Claims and James Murphy. So Veronica, in that instance, are they telling you we're rejecting it, or they're just like going behind your back and calling them?
They'll go Tower Hill. Someone said it. Tower Hill is one of the biggest one. They won't talk to you. Flood claims. We had that challenge with this hurricane. We did have a lot of challenges. And sometimes, even after months and months that we've been communicating with the field adjuster, that we have presented the contract, the signed contract on the field, we will hand a copy to the adjusters on the field. They will still say, we don't have a copy of your LOR. Yeah, it's happening. They're calling homeowners directly. There's many carriers that are doing it. Many carriers that they
I,
will go behind our backs.
I'm seeing that on some flood claims too. I have a valid NFIP letter of rep, and I'm getting information from the homeowner forwarding it to me. And every time I email them back with a copy of the LOR, and I say, as you're aware, we represent, Miss So-and-so, please refrain from contacting them directly. And, most of the time they ignore us. I had one adjuster respond that says that the contract you have is between you and the insured, but it's not between us, so we don't have to recognize it. So it's it's just crazy land that we're in.
All these comments are awesome, but Craig said flood is a different animal. I'll say most flood adjusters, we did a lot of flood in this most recent storm on the west coast of Florida, and a lot of commercial. And most of them are dealing directly with the president of the association, even if there's a PA on it, even if there's an attorney, even if there's association counsel that's not even representing it, but they are the representative for the board, right? They're not in an argumentative state. They're just acting like a go-between. And flood adjusters, I don't know who's giving them the direction, but they very much are going straight to, we deal with a lot of residential and commercial in these types of situations, storms, and they go straight to the policyholder, right? I've seen further where they're ignoring the husband and only addressing the wife. So they're getting direction from someone to solely go to, that name listed on that policy. In other news though, I see a lot of the PAs posted up some of my favorite insurance companies, which is why we need to work together. So Tower Hill, Frontline, and Security First. When a contractor's estimate is presented, I mean, I had $1.5 million paid at a Frontline in short order. I had a $65,000 trusses through a roof, and then added on an engineer, and then supplemented, paid out in 45 days on Tower Hill items, where they were ignoring the PA. And we just had a quick conversation. I said, hey, it's your estimate. It's my photos and documentation plus yours. Look, is the goal getting the settlement for the homeowner? It is. Great. They called our office with the homeowner. The homeowner said, I don't understand this stuff. We went down the estimate. Homeowner called you on the back end. You supported them. It got settled. It's an interesting path, but for some reason, you're right. Those insurance companies are trying to sideline the PA. How do you fight that as a public adjuster? I think Veronica hit it in the beginning. Be part of FAPI or NAPIA. Be part of a strong organization. That's where you start, right?
Absolutely. And I would say, as I mentioned, before, Nancy's on this call and Juan Moya, who's the current FAPIA president, is on this call. For those of you who are on this call that are public adjusters and are not FAPIA members, you're doing yourselves and your clients a disservice. It's an amazing organization. Nancy, if you want to put your contact info in the chat, this is a plug because it's such a great organization, and Nancy and Juan and everybody there, does such great work. As you can see, I mean, James Murphy put in the chat that, he was having issues and now he uses the FAPIA drafted, NFIP docs, and now he's getting better responses. So that's what I was talking about earlier about having a strong network of people, because that's not just for public adjusters in there. Attorneys like myself are in FAPIA, and I'm a free resource to anybody. You don't have to just be sending me a claim to get the answer to a question that you might have. It's really important that we stand together. It's just it's crazy what these insurance companies are getting away with. But I would say, like when what's happening with Veronica comes up on your claims where they're just sidestepping you, just do your best to respond with respect and integrity, because so many times in litigation we're seeing emails or documentation that become evidence and potentially shown to juries at trial. It's unfortunate to think this way, but thinking this way puts yourself in the best situation for success. But just pretend that every claim you're working on not only is going to litigation, but is going before a jury. And if you attack it with that manner, even if they're treating you with disrespect, if that's in writing, let them dig their own grave, because they're going to have to answer to why they were treating you so poorly, and you're giving them the utmost respect. Hopefully there will be some legislative reforms in regards to what they're allowed to do and how they get away with things. There's a lot of statutes that put requirements. For example, they have 7 days to respond to any communications in writing. They have 60 days to make a coverage determination. But then what? If they don't do it, it doesn't say what happens. And it's like a slap on the wrist. And okay, great. In a deposition, I can say, okay, well, I sent my letter of rep on March 1st. I sent a follow-up on March 10th, and then on March 20th and April 2nd, and you didn't respond. And they're like, yeah, we didn't. And, I mean, it makes them look bad, but there's really no recourse. But anyway, I
Yeah,
digress.
I agree, Matthew. I always said it, put it in writing. If you just finish a call with the desk adjuster, do a follow-up email. Thank you for the conversation. We spoke about this, this, and this. We will be following up with you, or you're gonna get back with your supervisor. You're gonna review my estimate. Put it in writing. It is a lot of work, but that's what protects what you just said. If it's not in writing, it never happened.
Exactly. All right, let's see the next topic here. And actually, Laz Lopez was asking, I think he was asking one of the members who was having issues with their contract, was your contract in full compliance? So, that's another question where if you're ever unsure of that, I'm happy to take a look, or you can ask, FAPIA, or like I said, they have forms that, you're able to look at and use as resources. All right, next topic. What strategies, excuse me, what strategies are you personally using to prepare for a potentially active hurricane season, both from a business and legal standpoint?
Well, on my side, I will say keep yourself informed. We're having a lot of changes in the industry. So become part of FAPIA. I agree 100%. They will give you everything. Like they'll give you the templates, they'll keep you informed. Make sure that you're training yourself, that you're training your staff. Make sure that you have a documentation protocol for every claim. You should do the same with every single claim, and make sure that you are asking for the full policies from the beginning. Everybody should be reviewing the complete policy, not just the declaration page, everything.
Absolutely. And on top of that, from a litigation standpoint, there are some claims that we're fighting still from Milton. I still even have a few Ians from these carriers that are just dragging their feet. But what I always tell my clients is, hey, look, we're going into hurricane season. I strongly encourage you to get an engineer. And when I say you, it's we front it as a litigation cost, but you know, it used to be when we would get paid our attorney's fees, we would just hire engineers, obviously with the client on board with it, but we would explain to them the benefit of having an engineer. But we would always front that as a litigation expense because we knew if the claim was covered, we'd be paid back by the insurance company. But now with the new laws where we don't get attorney's fees, even though I do believe engineers can be a very useful tool to help prove our case on a denied claim, especially when the insurance company has an engineer, I always run that by the client and let them know, hey, this is ultimately going to come out of your recovery. So, you know, I recommend you get one, or if you want to wait, we can wait till we get closer to hurricane season. And now that we're just about 4 weeks away from hurricane season, I'm reaching out to my clients that do have these denied roof claims, and I'm just bringing that conversation back to light. As we're getting close to hurricane season, if we do get hit with a new storm, the insurance company is going to try to tell you have to file a new claim. So if we have that engineer who's able to inspect it before a new storm comes, we'll easily be able to compare the photos. I wouldn't necessarily file a new claim anytime you have new damage. It might be exacerbating old damage and you can claim it under the original claim. But without that report, it'll be really hard to tell. They're going to want you to file a new claim because it's easier for them. So that's just one tool that we're using as we get close to litigation. I'm sorry, as we get close to hurricane season. Yeah, so Nancy's basically saying, you know, really important to take few pictures and handing it over to an attorney, just or not to do that. Yeah, I mean, when you're signing up a claim, it's important that you do everything you can before it goes to an attorney. You want to adjust it as best as you can, especially nowadays where the homeowner's having to pay a second percentage. Um, you know, Veronica and I kind of like have that transparency. There are some times where, you know, we're kind of spitballing ideas here and we're like, oh, like, why don't we just try DFS mediation? And then at that point, we can tell the homeowner we've literally tried everything. At that point, it's clear it's either litigation or close the claim. And many times that ends up resolving the claim. And you know, if you're quick to just, okay, I signed it up, I did my part, now just call me when it settles, you're doing the homeowner a disservice, especially in today's landscape. And not only that, you know, we try our best to move the files and litigation as quickly as possible, but unfortunately, these insurance companies, we're at their mercy. If they're not calling us to settle and we're not getting that evidence that forces them to settle, the claim can sit for, you know, 18 months. So it's always best to avoid that if it's possible. Um, so Jonathan, Ben, do you have any strategies that you're using for your businesses as we get close to hurricane season?
Yeah, well, to piggyback off what you said, Matt, you know, I think it's very important from a mold assessment or even inspection point of view, to check the home before some big storm comes, because you may have issues that you don't even know about. You could have claims you don't know about, but if those get, you know, some of these storms are now getting really bad and really quickly, you know, they intensify overnight. So I think it's important now more than ever to really know what's going on in the home and have that documentation, especially from that health safety. You know, if you already have mold and then you get something that, you know, could flood your house or tons and tons of sideways rain, stuff like that, just really want to be 2 steps ahead of it.
Absolutely. And Nancy had mentioned in there, so I'm actually doing a webinar through FAPIA on May 7th. It's focusing on apprentices and new public adjusters. It'll kind of teach the new rules and the ethics and everything. Nancy, correct me if I'm wrong, but you don't have to be an apprentice to sign up, and it's free. So if you're a FAPIA member, make sure you click the link, and I think non-FAPIA members can attend too. Oh, there you go. Everyone can sign up and you get CE credits. They're approved. So that's on May 7th. Nancy plugged it for me. So there you go. We kind of touched on this earlier, but how have communications between professionals like adjusters, contractors, attorneys, remediators improved or declined in this new climate?
Jump on that. You want to take that?
Go ahead, Ben.
Well, I mean, I mentioned this earlier to you guys on our pre-call, right? I think sadly, and it's, what's happened across the country for other reasons, happened to this industry, right? So division between contractors, right? And we're a specialty restoration contractor, but we're also full GCs, right? So for the build process, for the structural components, in engineering, the claims process has divided the professionals. Where if I go back to what I started with, or what I always start with, we're really all working for the client, right? We're all working for that insured. In your perspective, for me to a customer, a homeowner, or a building owner, or a property, a board. If we keep putting them at the front of our mind and understand that that's who we're working for, right? And obviously we all can make a great living doing the best for them, right? But the separation, and it's caused by, live example, I've been on the phone with an adjuster who told me, well, the PA is not giving me, good answers, and he won't settle, and literally 20-minute rant bashing the PA, right? Now, awesome, our billing department's a recorded line, but we go back to the PA and go, hey, this is a little odd. It's, the adjuster's saying that you won't settle for the following reasons, and that's why our bills are held up, and that's why the customer is not getting checks. And we speak to the PA, and he has the same phone call with the adjuster, except all they're saying is it's the restoration company. I didn't get their documentation. And we're like, and where Veronica pointed out, document everything. We're like, actually, we emailed you 17 times. We've called you 33 times on these dates at these times by these people, right? So causing separation, right? And see, it's that pointing fingers, right? But if professionals trust professionals, so if I can go back and I know that Jonathan's protocol is specific to the property he inspected. It's not a generic report that he just duplicated and put a new name and address on top, right? And I know that Matt saw that policy from the beginning and advised us on, hey, this is what is here. And now we know what we're working with, and we can be clear to the customer, hey, this is what's available to you, right? And I think if public adjusters opened it up a little bit, and I've gotten it back from other contractors too. We do a lot of restoration work, remediation, asbestos on properties where there's already a contractor, either hired by the association permanently doing large projects, right? Or it's the homeowner's cousin, uncle, family member, and they think that there's a reason not to bring in a specialist, which if you look at majority of professional fields, right? Medical, dentistry, law, right? Everyone specializes. So awesomely, our company, we have called 4 or 5 divisions, and there are specialists. There are people who have been doing this, 10,000 hours, 10 years plus, 20 years plus, just that subject. And when we can document that and work together, if a PA can tell me, but this is what I really need, right? Hey, can you show me that that trust was broken? Right? You said, can you get a video? Well, we've upgraded. You said, how did we change our documentation earlier? We've opened up our system where customers can submit photos or videos into our intake before we even inspect. So we're getting some of those videos and initial pictures, and it shows that it's from the customer. And we've also seen when you show that to the adjuster, hey, look, we weren't even there yet. This is what it looked like. Now we're there, and this is what we did. Right? You're questioning the PA's estimate, but he's only trying to put back what was already damaged. Right? So again, working together, I know our billing team is sitting there willing to speak to every public adjuster out there and share copies of our, it's cloud-based, right? Our photos before and afters of every step. There's got to be 1,000 photos in most jobs. I'm talking small residential stuff.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean,
How do we work together? How do we stop the separation between professionals?
well, that's simple. I mean, as long as you have that relationship that, it's not that this is the first time I'm meeting you because, Joe Schmo is a common customer, whether it's a client of mine and a customer of yours. and even if that does happen, I usually pick up the phone and I reach out to that restoration company or whoever it may be, and I'll tell them like, hey, I'm representing, Mr. Smith, and we're dealing with the claim, looking forward to working with you. Let me know, like, what we can do to try to, help get your bill paid. Hopefully you can help us help you do that, because, if you're helping prove the claim, that's the best way to try to maximize, you know, getting the homeowner what they need, getting you the money that you've billed. And that's why, like, the public adjusters I work with, or the restoration people that I work with, we're always on a collaborative basis. I'm usually speaking with them as I'm speaking with the client, and that way when I'm updating the client and then the client's calling the PA, because the PA was hired before they were hired to me, so they have that relationship. The PA is not learning that information from the client for the very first time. It's an informed conversation, like we are a team, because the attorney can't work the claim and get it settled without the PA working that file up properly. And so it's really just a mindset of taking that approach. I think there are some plaintiffs attorneys that look at it as like a me. I've heard from people who were, other plaintiffs attorneys who will remain nameless, that are basically like, well, the PA is not my client. They don't have any obligation to get updates from me. They'll find out it settles when it settles. And I'm like, okay, well, if that works for you, that's great. But that's definitely not how I approach things. In the 7 years I've been doing property, I've never done that, even when I was working for other people. And that's kind of like one of the things we focus on, is that teamwork emphasis. And that way, when they try to pit us against each other, or they try to say, well, we're only offering 20 global, why don't you go beat up the restoration guy? I'll say, no, I'm not going to beat up the restoration guy, because they did the work. They helped the damage. Instead of being 40,000, it's only 20, because they did what they had to do. And it's really that kind of mindset. It looks like there was a comment up here before that said there's a lot of people chasing money and not in the client's best interest. I don't know about you all, but I think the one good thing to happen from all of this reform, really starting with 2019 with the AOB reform, but especially the 2021 reform, and so on, is that it's gotten rid of a lot of saturation in the market, both on the public adjusting side and the attorney side. Because I heard people who would do all kinds of different law, and they'd be like, oh yeah, I'll do a property damage claim. I mean, you're fighting over a policy, an insurance contract. It can't be that hard. And it's people like that that make bad case law that we're all stuck with. So Ben, to answer your question, how do we get around that? We just work as a team. And it's really not a hard concept, and it goes a long way. For some reason, so many people have pushback against that, but I can guarantee you the insurance companies are doing that. They're all talking to each other. They're all working with the same types of people. They all use the same engineering companies who are all telling them the same things. It's exactly, united we stand, divided we fall. I mean, it might be a little cheesy, but it's true. So, all right, we got just a couple more points here. Veronica,
I'd like to add that that's why hosting this type of events, where there's a bunch of public adjusters, hopefully there are restoration companies here, attorneys as well, we can collaborate. Like, if you don't know something, if you don't understand, if it's a claim that you cannot handle for whatever reasons, reach out to other public adjusters as well. We're not enemies. At the end of the day, we all have the same interest, and it's protecting the client, helping out those people that are in need. So I think we should definitely keep doing stuff like this, so that we can work together, we can share ideas, we can discuss what's happening, and maybe between all of us, we can find a solution. I think it's definitely great.
absolutely. And there's Facebook groups, there's like this attorney and public adjuster portal. People ask questions in that, don't be afraid to ask what you might think is a silly question, because I guarantee you at least 3 other people have the same question and they're just afraid to ask it. I'm in something similar with plaintiffs attorneys, and I ask a lot of questions, but I also respond to people's questions because I want the favor returned. And it's all about collaboration, because that's the only way that we get ahead on behalf of the homeowner. And that way, if you encounter a problem that somebody asked about or spoke to you about and stirred a conversation, you're already prepared to navigate it when it hits you on your claim. So, all right, I think we also kind of talked about this. It's a little different. Have you started seeing more pushback or underpaying on certain types of claims like roof replacements, mold remediations, or flood-related losses?
Yes, roof claims, there's also water claims. We have a lot of limitations, water exclusion, mold exclusions. But definitely the roof claims, they're now using this wear and tear on almost every old roof. So yes.
Yeah, and for me, I'm seeing a lot of issues with the 1% matching. I've found a loophole. I haven't gone to summary judgment or trial with it yet, but it was enough of a ripple that this in-house attorney basically said, "We've never seen this before. We don't know how to respond. If I'm not able to settle this case with you, we're going to send it to outside counsel because I don't want to make bad case law." So it kind of, I mean, it made me feel good, but it kind of made me think like, okay, I really need to pick and choose which case I'm going to push this on because I don't want to make bad case law either. And without letting the cat out of the bag, it for me, what worked, it was a flooring issue. It only works with like hardwood flooring or like bamboo flooring, not laminate. And we have like a flooring specialist who will test the thickness and they'll basically say something like, oh, well, even if you just remove the damaged portion, it's going to result in, unevenness, not for sake of matching, but it's a trip hazard. And so the repairability becomes an issue. And again, I didn't get to summary judgment, but it's taking the repairability aspect versus matching, but with an actual flooring expert who is able to attack it. And so far from the plaintiff's attorneys that I speak to, because as I mentioned, we do ask questions and we try to stay informed together. Nobody's really been able to get it that far. I hear some public adjusters and attorneys are like, oh, I beat the 1% all the time, but then they don't say how. So it's not that I don't believe them, but it's if it's not triggering ordinance and law or some kind of repairability, that's the biggest issue. So I'm seeing pushback on those. I'm also seeing State Farm not even inspecting damage. They're just denying. Oh, this happened 2 days ago. Okay, denied, constant and repeated. Thankfully I've been able to overcome all of those because it's such a silly position. But it results in having to hire a lawyer and go to litigation and depose the corporate rep and um, it's silly. What about
No,
you,
it's not
Ben?
that. If you do the due diligence from the beginning, you can have a better case. Ask for prior losses. Check satellite images. Um, those are key questions that we should ask to every homeowner. Like, when did you purchase the home? Have you made any repairs? Do you have evidence of receipts of the repairs that you've made? How old is the roof? Have you ever had a prior claim? What was the claim about? Did you do the repairs? Because those are questions that the carriers are going to ask. So do the due diligence from the beginning. Be
And
proactive.
not only that, but you should be searching the court docket to see if they have any prior claims because they may tell you no. Sometimes they're lying.
We tend to forget.
Sometimes they literally just don't remember. So like whatever county you're in, if they're in Palm Beach County docket search, you plug in their first and last name, you'll see everything that's there. And sometimes you catch something and then, you pull it up and you're like, well, it looks like you filed an IRMA claim. They're like, oh my God, I forgot about that. So I'm not saying that makes your claim not viable, but it's just information you want to know it from the forefront, beforehand. Ben, Jonathan, were you guys going to say anything? Looked at Jonathan.
Well, I would say, I'm more specific with mold, but I've seen a lot of different angles. But, I think it's interesting how the mold assessment plays in, and sometimes you'll have a water damage issue and you won't actually find physical mold. Like there could be something behind a wall or deep in the attic where it's inaccessible. And I've seen pushback, with mold assessment companies where they're not going to approve a mold remediation because there's no mold found. But I think it's an interesting little part of the industry. And a lot of these, the air quality testing guys, they'll just come in and take an air sample in the middle of the room, whereas sometimes you need a sample behind a wall or things like that to actually know if which way are we going with the repair? Is it a remediation or just a repair? So I think it's interesting how the mold assessment can kind of clog up the gears of the claim if it's not really doing a good job of showing mold.
Absolutely. All right, so this is actually a good topic for a good question for the May 7th webinar I'm doing, but if you guys could give one piece of advice to professionals newer to the industry, especially in Florida, what would it be?
If you are a new public adjuster, I will say that it is not just about estimating, creating an estimate, sending it over to the carrier, and then just waiting to be paid. No, it's much more than that. We got to do our job. We got to investigate, document, review the policy. I think I've said it enough. Review the policy. That's key. Communicate with the clients. Keep your clients up to date. I hear a lot of stories from clients that I've been trying to reach out this person and they're not getting back to me. They're your clients. Make sure that you're keeping them up to date. Get educated. Join FAPIA. There's many tools that we can do to help expedite the claim process and obtain settlements, but we gotta do our job.
Yeah, and I would say, find a mentor, whether it's through an organization or you just find an individual that's more experienced and, willing to take you under their wings. There's so much that you can learn really in any industry, any profession. Nobody's perfect from day one. And, you'd be silly to think that, oh, I'm different. Even myself, I've been practicing for 10 years. They call it the practice of law because you're never mastering it. You're always practicing, you're always getting better. And I learn something almost every single day. And that doesn't make me, any different, but it's just really important that you're reading the policy, you're, at least for attorneys, you're keeping up to date with case law. And that's another thing, like, even though public adjusters don't necessarily need to know the case law, I always like to put it out there, and whether or not they learn from it or even care about it is up to them. Like I said, there's so much change with these judges that just like are so pro insurance or just pro sick of, just sick of these cases and sick of these homeowners. And there was some fraud, but it was minor, but it got a bad name. And maybe they thought, oh, well, attorneys are making too much money, so if I throw the claim out, this will punish them and they'll learn a lesson. But really all it does is it hurts the homeowner. And with the whole RCV ACV thing, and if you are writing an estimate that doesn't have depreciation in it, you might as well just not submit an estimate. They actually passed in the Florida Administrative Code. It was an emergency rule that was passed for Hurricane Milton that just became a law effective, I think, this week. I think it's like Rule 69 dash or 69B dash 220.201. It's basically requiring variance in your estimate. So you have to basically, if you disagree with the insurance company's estimate, or if you change your estimate in any way, you have to indicate who's changed it and what you're changing. And there's a whole bunch of requirements. But you just have to stay up to date with these things. That's another reason, again, I'm going to keep plugging FAPIA, but they teach all these things. There was a bulletin that they put out. But it's important because you not being up to date with the law is not an excuse if you do it wrong. And you could be in trouble, but they also could void your contract because the insurance company would like nothing more than to screw you over, and they will any chance they get. So be mindful of that. Go ahead,
Yeah,
Jonathan.
and I would say, for me, for newer professionals, I built my mold assessment company mainly up with social media. And I think especially things like this roundtable or podcasts, or even just putting videos out that telling people what you do. Like, I have people asking me about their policies, and I'm like, I'm just a mold assessor, at least currently. And a lot of people don't know still even what a public adjuster is, I think, or they don't know that they could have an attorney, representing them. And, you know, they definitely don't know what mold is most of the time. So that's why I focus on educating people about that. But definitely, you know, staying on top of bringing in new clients, especially with the new laws. I think you can kill two birds with one stone.
Absolutely. It looks like Juliet asked a question. How do you handle claims for multi-complex rentals that have addendums with the lease, like mold, new construction, etc., for buildings under a year old? Veronica, do you no?
No,
Okay.
I don't, yeah, I don't
So,
handle those type of claims.
I'm gonna jump in.
oh, go ahead. Go. Yeah, Ben.
I mean, I'm going to simplify it. How do you handle it? I mean, it's all about documentation and separating items per unit, per owner, per tenant, right? Which again, I'm going to address this as when we approach a property, I'm not approaching a claim. I work for the claim industry, right? But I'm not a claims professional. I have claims experience, right? So the public adjusters and the attorneys are the claims professionals. Right. So on the contractor side and specializing in, you know, fire, water, mold, asbestos, all those environmental items, right? Oil cleanup, whatever. We really are just dividing things and separating it for clear billing and documentation the way we would if someone said, hey, I'm cash paying. We document the same exact way. What unit is this? Right? Who's the responsible party? Right? Because I always want to make sure that I have the responsible party on my invoice. Right? That has to do with lien laws and everything else, nothing to do with the claim, but we've dealt with, and it's why I found a lot more ease in the claims process and the payment process with working with the carriers, with working with adjusters, as we're able to document, hey, this is unit XYZ. We have buildings where one unit is owned by the association. It's a foreclosure and they're responsible for everything. And then we have multiple units that are affected that have different policies with different amounts of coverage. Then you have the owners with no coverage, right? And then you have people with vacant units and they're not understanding why there's coverage issues there, that they only, you know, snowbirds who come down. So the amount of complications, I'll say experience-wise, that we've dealt with, we've just learned to separate, right? Triage everything, document it that way from our initial inspection, label all our folders and photos that way. So we can pass that to the claims professional and go, here, this is the situation. This is what's going on. Now, I've met PAs that will go, okay, well, I'm going to handle the commercial, you know, the association's claim. I'm not handling the units. Right. Or the same, a lot of restoration contractors don't want to break it up. They just want to do the work and I'll hand you the bill. Well, again, documentation and proper documentation is a major difference, right? We can all go in and take 1,000 photos, right? Or send someone else to do the documentation. So again, professionals trust professionals. I'd say, you know, even I say newest techs, majority of our techs that are doing documentation are been with us 5 to 7 years, right? I've worked in 5, 7 different states. It takes being on different types of losses to start understanding why that picture of the corner of the room, right? Or using, and I think it's later where you touch on technology, Matt, we discussed it in our pre-call, right? But the tools at our disposal as contractors, right? To document claims using technology, right? Truly can help the entire claims process. So if somebody has a specific, I know you'll answer it on the claims way of it, but from my perspective, if we look at every property, whether you called me for the tiniest little item in your home or a 30-story building, right? It's separating every piece of that documentation so that the adjuster sitting at a desk could see the entire picture. It's like telling a story, right? Your documentation, even before we were doing video documentation, feels like they're looking through a flip book, feels like they're looking through a video, right? It paints the entire picture and then you can justify everything. But when it comes to a recent loss, and I think the note is, right, the question posed is about a specific claim right now, right?
Yeah, or the way I'm interpreting that is it says buildings under a year old. So if it's under a year old, it should be under the
Under
manufacturer's
warranty.
builder's warranty. And if that's the case, hopefully it's definitely under that year mark. And then usually what you can do is you could submit a claim through the builder's warranty and have them fix the issues. But, just thinking with my attorney cap, like if this was somebody coming with an initial consult, I would have a bunch of follow-up questions to that question, because it would depend, number one, what does that master policy say when it comes to mold? Does it have, a rider that limits mold, because the mold is the responsibility of each unit renter, the renter in each unit? Does the lease say who's responsible for mold? Actually, who caused the mold? Was it because the renter was negligent and let a leak fester over a period of time? Was it something that was unforeseeable and accidental? So it really would depend. But I would say the best place to start, other than looking through all the policies, is to submit that claim through the builder's warranty if it was something that would be covered under the warranty policy. And if not, look to that master policy and see. So I don't know if that answered your question, but there's a bunch of follow-ups that I would ask to figure that out. All right. So the last topic that we're going to talk about today, and then everybody can get on with the rest of their Thursdays. I think this is a fun one, and Ben kind of just alluded to it just now. How do you see AI, technology, or digital tools changing the way that we handle claims, inspections, or legal processes in the industry moving forward? Who wants to kick it off?
Well, on our end, it definitely can help expedite the claim review process and claim management. Like there's softwares that will give you IA integration to keep your files organized or help you with the inspections and the documentations. There's also tools that can help you with policy analysis. But even though it's a great tool that and it's reshaping the industry, don't be lazy. Read what you're sending, take the time to review your file as well. So I think it's great. We use it, where we're utilizing IA to claim management, policy analyses, inspections, scope reviews, but do your work as well. Like don't be lazy.
Yeah, I mean, Nancy said it, and I've seen it too. The insurance companies are already starting to use AI. There are certain AI-based denial letters, and you can tell because they don't really make sense and they kind of contradict themselves. The one thing I'll say is if you are using AI, make sure you're looking at what's happening. There's a famous issue that happened. I think at this point, it's probably like 6 or 7 months ago, but there was an attorney in Texas who used AI to draft a motion, and AI, it basically made up a bunch of case law, and the attorney never bothered to look up the case law, and it was in federal court. And for those of you who don't know, federal court judges are strict, no nonsense judges, way more strict than state court, and you don't mess around there. And this judge was furious about this made up case law and this made up motion. So if you are going to use it, make sure you're looking at what it's doing. It's a great it's a great tool to help you like resource, like I still wouldn't supplement it for your network or your, like having an attorney review a policy, but you can like put a policy into AI and have it basically, tell you something, or help you with your streamlining processes and things like that. But it's interesting how AI it's inevitable, whether you fight it or whether you embrace it, it's coming. So it's just a matter of what happens next. They've already passed a law that basically say insurance companies don't need to rely on in-person inspections anymore. They can have certain tools that basically adjust from a computer, or there's an app or a program the homeowner downloads and kind of walks around and films the damage for them, and then somehow an estimate is created from that. I had a PA text me yesterday. He said, Edison is telling me, I think it was Edison, it was either Edison or Tower Hill, is telling him that they're no longer allowed to walk roofs because it's a liability. And he asked me, it's like, well, how are they supposed to tell me what's been damaged without going on the roof? I said, well, hopefully it doesn't end up in litigation, but if it does, how are they really going to fight, you being on that roof and actually inspecting and seeing what happened versus somebody who kind of just peeked at it? I mean, it's silly, but These are all ways that technology are advancing for better or worse. And just to look, yeah, he said Florida Penn, so Edison's the sister company. Yeah, let's see. Yeah, somebody mentioned drones, but again, a drone doesn't necessarily tell you how many, lifted or debonded shingles there are, and it's I wouldn't, if I were you on the homeowner side, I wouldn't rely on just a simple drone to do your inspections, but that's just me because the insurance attorney will definitely attack you for that. Um, Anything else you guys wanted to say?
And it's all about how you utilize AI. AI is right, is evolving. So, you're saying the Texas courts where they're writing policy, or the insurance companies that are using them just to auto draft something, right? But it's much more, you can utilize it to take your estimates and break it into percentages per category, create graphs, create an entire pitch book basically on, like what I was saying earlier, right? Use it to write a story about the facts that you find, right? Use it to further explain. I found you can have Grok or OpenAI, right? Write an entire report with images based on your images or based on your exact estimate that either is customer centric and explains to them in English what that exactiment line items mean, or speaks in more of an insurance adjuster's point of view, right? And brings up local county, city, or state code. And you can apply those to your line items. So Veronica, you're right. Don't be lazy. Okay. Hard work pays off. I've been doing this basically since, post Wilma, supplements on post Wilma claims. And, we're focused on Florida, but we do this in about a dozen states actively. And there's years ago, we have claims in from North Carolina years ago that they were sending the customers an app. They asked the customers to take all the photos. They actually told us, we uploaded probably 1,000 photos and they told us that's not enough. We want it from the customer. They have to do it on their phone. The policyholder has to do it. Interesting. It's kind of like the grocery stores with no checkout person, right? You're now self-servicing your own policy. So I don't know where it breaks down that how the homeowner becomes a claim professional and is able to understand what to document, right? But and I don't know, again, where case law is going to come out to in the future for that, right? But right now, the technology, if you want to think about it, there's the tools, right? The drones and the sketch programs and all those items. But I believe the best use for it right now is to expand on your documentation, right? To show it from different perspectives, right? To analyze costs across the system. I mean, the AI that can read the web and read pricing, right? You could take a Verisk report, right, which is pricing data, and apply that and show how, again, the insurance company's pricing or the IA's pricing is beyond off, right? You don't have to rewrite your price list, just use market data.
Exactly.
And it can do it in minutes. Instead of years ago, I was scrolling through and selecting items and literally searching Home Depot for prices of things and calling contractors and trying to find the comparable prices for services that weren't regular for us, but the adjuster's asking us for a complete estimate. Right. So
Yeah.
technology is here to stay, obviously. It's going to advance. What can we do to ensure that it applies to the facts? I think it allows a lot of people to be very generic in their reports. I mentioned earlier with Jonathan, we've talked about this in prior, the generic home inspection reports, when somebody went in and took, one sample in the middle of the living room, or there's a new product now that's saying it's going to AI analyze the mold test results, right? There's a big concerns because you said it, they just published the articles about AI coming up with its own, call it, version of common sense, which is making stuff up.
Yeah. It's a wild world that we're living in, and to think that, you know, how far it's advanced in such a short time, it'll be interesting to see. I mean, I think if it's used for the right reasons, it can be very helpful, but it's definitely going to create additional hurdles where, you know, they're trying to point fingers at other things or other people to say, oh, well, no adjuster actually wrote that. It was AI, so we're not responsible, which I don't think that argument would hold weight, but I've seen them push sillier arguments before, so I wouldn't be surprised. But who knows?
If you
So
wrap up, I see you posted that it's ending. I mean, anybody's welcome to, I posted up our website. I'll post up my email address. If you have a question regarding restoration or construction, you know, bring me into the conversation. Oftentimes it's not for us, but we would have the best referral for it, depending on the area, right? But I'd like to see if we can help people. I think that's the first step and first approach. And then, you know, education to the customer is one of the hardest things, right? Every customer, we didn't raise this, but dealing with the customers and why we need to all be on the same page. Every customer I deal with after a storm, right, or my office deals with, is following the direction of the last person they spoke to. Very dangerous. So if we can all be on the same page, if the PAs that are out there during storms, you know, we're entering a new storm season this year, right? I hope that it's monumental for everybody, but I believe it can be a much easier process if we all work together.
absolutely. Yeah, well, so anyway, that was our roundtable webinar. I thought there were some interesting topics that we brought today. Really great questions that were asked by the attendees. The four of us put our contact information in the chat. I believe there's a way you can download the chat by clicking the three dots in the chat box. It says save chat. But anyway, you know, Veronica's a FAPIA member. I'm a FAPIA member. You can find Jonathan. He's at Mold Assessor on social media, and Ben dropped his email in the chat. You know, feel free to reach out to all of us. Again, you don't have to work with us to pick our brain or just talk, you know, whether it's a specific claim you're dealing with or just in general on a certain topic. We're, like I said, I try to host these every month or at least every other month. I'm doing one with Nancy on May 7th. So, you know, feel free to add us on social media. We post daily, and you know, whatever happens in this industry, I love doing this. There's nothing I like more than helping a homeowner that felt desperate and out of options and you know, was about to give up. And you know, when they give you that sincere thank you, and you know, they're almost in tears. Sometimes they are in tears. You know, that's what I do this for. And I think everybody on this call has the same mindset, and it's great to connect and get to do things like this with people in our industry. It's really important. It's just as important as handling your claims. So thank you everybody for taking the time to be here, and we'll definitely be in touch as we get closer to hurricane season.
Thank you, Matthew. Thank you for hosting this. It was great.
Absolutely. Thank you,
Thank
everybody.
you so much.
All right.
Thanks,
Take-
Matt, and everyone. Appreciate it.
All right.
Bye.